Number 9.
Stasi? Okay. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Is there any opposition? Okay, we've approved the agenda. The next item is a review and approval of the minutes for the June 2nd, 2009 meeting. Those minutes have been provided to all of the commissioners. And I would ask, first of all, any additions or corrections to the minutes? Yes?
Yeah, on Ivar Goldart, on page 7, last full paragraph, there's a word that's substituted for the correct word. I'm supposedly saying it would constitute an unlawful subrogation. I don't even know what subrogation really means in this context, but the word was arrogation of power, which is a taking without authority. Goodbye and good luck.
Okay, that correction is noted on page 7. I know these minutes were extensive, so, yes.
Is there pulling in the room?
Yes, right here.
I think you're misquoted as well in the next sentence. I think that your question, you raised the issue that the laboratory who might disseminate DNA information might be guilty of a Class E felony, not this commission taking the vote. Am I right?
You're right. Not the commission.
Right. We're without guilt.
I'm sorry, did you know what that is? This is sentence before? Okay. Dr. McQuillan. Okay, but the laboratory disclosing. Okay. Any other additions or corrections? May I have a motion to approve the minutes? Okay. Jim Murphy, second. Dr. Jenny, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Okay, that motion is carried. Before we get to the laboratory accreditation items, I would like to, for the record, go around the room and ask each of the commissioners, first of all, to introduce themselves and establish that we do have a quorum. And I forgot to do that in the beginning. So let's start in New York City with Ivar.
Ivar Goldart.
Okay. Peter? Peter?
Michelle.
Okay. Is Barry there? Anybody else? Okay. Okay, Judge?
Peter McQuillan.
James Murphy. Gary Corbett.
Denise O'Donnell?
Kathleen Morado.
Bill Fitzpatrick.
Okay, I think that's it for the commissioners, but we do have a quorum. And then the others in New York City, could you introduce yourselves, please?
Nares from the Office of Chief Medical Examiner.
Michael Lea from Suffolk County Medical Examiner Laboratory.
Okay, thank you. And we'll start around the room here.
Mark Cronquist from the CCAS Office of Legal Services.
Kathy Levine, Office of Forensic Services.
Okay, and I'll start over here.
Erie is New York State Lab.
Nancy Bevetta, Monroe County Public Safety Lab.
Don Fornan, State Police Lab.
Steve Sesson, State Police.
Bob Campbell, State Police Lab. This is Christina, NYPD Laboratory.
Scott O'Neill, York State Police Laboratory.
BP's all NYPD Police Lab.
Phil Pulaski, NYPD. Tim Monroe, State Police.
Christine Hammond, Office of Special Narcotics.
Richard Tizzo, New York State Police.
Michael Dowd, Westchester County Public Safety.
Louis Stellato, CCAS Office of Forensic Services.
Kathleen Clark, Office of Forensic Services.
Brian Fish, Office of Forensic Services.
Bob Ossowitz, Erie County Medical Examiner's Toxicology Laboratory.
Betsy Spratt, Westchester County Department of Labs and Association of Forensic Toxicology.
Monroe County Medical Examiner's Office of Forensic Toxicology Lab.
John Simmons, Erie County Forensic.
Robert Demo, Washington County Department of Labs and Research Division. Christian Cheney, City Yonkers, Police Department. Steve Bowman, New York State Police.
Office of Chief Medical Examiner.
Sean Hearn, TCJS.
Okay, especially want to thank all the lab directors and personnel who are attending in person or watching by webcast. Is the webcast working at this point?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. So we also welcome anyone who's tuning in to the webcast. We're going to begin our laboratory updates and accreditation items. That's number 4 in your materials. And the first item we have before us today is the Westchester County Department of Labs and Research Division of Forensic Toxicology. And Betsy Pratt, would you like to join us? Thank you. And we have our report. And Catherine, you want to go through that?
In your packet, you have a letter from ABFT dated July 1st, 2009, granting accreditation for the accreditation period July 1st, 2009 to June 30th, 2011. Also in your packet is the ABFT inspection report, which occurred in April and May of this year. On that, there were 2 essential notes, or 1 essential note, excuse me. And that has been corrected. You should have remediation as well in that, in your packets. As well, although separate from this accreditation, there is a letter dated June 18th noting that the laboratory will not be continuing their as-by lab accreditation. They were the only lab in the state that is ABFT and as-by lab accredited. That's just as a, it's given to the members as a, just as a additional letter, as that's not part of the vote of accreditation. So we should probably look at the, if there's any questions regarding the ABFT inspection report, that's Brad and answer specifics.
So Betsy, would you just talk for a minute about the remediation and as well as your decision not to pursue the lab of international accreditation?
The remediation was basically an oversight on our part where we didn't put plus or minus 2% difference in retention time for our different drugs that we're looking at. We do less than that, but it was in our procedure as plus or minus 5%, and that was an essential. So all of those have been changed throughout all of our methods. The reason that we chose not to go for the as-by lab inspection has to do with personnel, and the ABFT inspection is much more science-oriented to toxicology than the as-by, which is very general and covers a lot of different disciplines. So we felt that with personnel and also timing, that we felt it was better to concentrate on the one that we have, and that's our major decision for going that way, and not going international.
I know one of the concerns in the report, and we've had this issue before, is concern about your space and the dire need for more space, which did not affect your accreditation, but it seems to be a serious issue facing the lab itself.
It is a serious issue. We were scheduled to have the next edition of our building put on. That was taken over by the mitochondrial DNA for medical biology people. And as a result, our building, due to the climate, has been canceled till further notice. So we have spread out as much as we can, and we are in dire need of space, but there's really nothing we can do. We were even on this building, which should have been a problem for our accreditation because it wasn't as secure as it should have been for instrumentation. We did bring that back into at least our hallways that we have, but we are spread out quite a bit.
Any other discussion by commissioners in this particular report, inspection report? Yes, Dr. Jenny?
Well, in addition to stating, because this survey, there are institutional personnel who have developed methods, not allocation methods, which is unfortunate for certain obviously control in but it does raise the question of are we compensating for an active person in the development of delegation and methods?
No, what's happening is it changed our turnaround time, and that turnaround time has started to increase because just recently we've spent almost a year validating and bringing in our two new Q-traps, LCMS and MS2 traps, and we finally brought the benzodiazepines back in-house. But they've taken an inordinate amount of time because of the quantitation as well as the screening that we do. So although we're saving the money by not sending them out, it's taking away from personnel. So we're in the process of training. So it is affecting our turnaround time, and we do have to select which case has to go first as far as quantitation and confirmation, depending on the type of case that it is.
Thank you. Any other questions? Could I have a motion to accredit the Westchester Division of Forensic Toxicology pursuant to the report by AFT? Is there a motion, Dr. Jenny? A second, Dr. Saji? Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Is there any opposition? The motion is carried, and congratulations, and sorry that it's so difficult for you to continue. I think at some point we need as a commission to take note of these issues, to continue to confront the labs and see if we can do more to advocate on their behalf. This is tough in this economic climate, but I think we continually run into these issues that are long-term, that don't affect accreditation right now, but do affect the future of forensic science in the state. So it's something hopefully we can pursue in the months ahead. Mark, I don't think we need a vote. We need to do take any action with respect to the change to eliminate the accreditation by labs.
Because they will still maintain the
Okay.
we only need one.
Great. Okay. So our next item is the New York City Office of the City Medical Examiner, Department of Forensic Toxicology. We have Dr. Saji here as a member of the commission. And that report is before us. Kathy, do you want to summarize the report?
They also have the July 1st, 2009 accreditation letter from AFT. Two letters, the one dated June 25th and June 18th were inadvertently left out of your packets, but they were sent you after a few days ago. But those were the response to their corrective actions. They had one essential no that I can let Dr. Stage obviously explain further. And then there was one essential criteria that was usually marked yes by the inspectors, but also when it went to accreditation, they wanted remediation or corrective action for that. So you should have in your packets now is the June 25th letter regarding a response letter to those AFT, as well as you have the standing operating procedure as well.
Okay, so Dr. Saji, do you want to talk about the corrective actions that we're taking?
Yes. There's.
Okay, excuse me. Yes, Peter?
Yeah, just a request. Since, normally if there are things that we receive that are very technical, there's somebody I can go to at least clarify it. This arrived more recently, and to be quite frank with you, I didn't understand a lot of it. So when you explain it to us, could you also simplify it a little bit? Chemistry can follow you?
Yes. I was just going to apologize that I did not reprint that part of my SOP, but, well, no, not the SOP, but, since I have it. I could probably send a little bit too much. I had probably sent a little bit too much paperwork, but I didn't want to appear that I'm withholding anything. There was the first, the E7 question. The inspectors felt, and we did agree with them after some discussion, that our lowest control on our calibration curve was, it was essentially too low for the calibration curve. So we changed that, and it was not a very difficult thing. You want me to get into calibration? Was that the question, Cheeto, on that one or on the next one?
No, that was if you don't mind, could you also explain what, if any, is the significance of that disparity in terms of casework?
Oh, okay. They felt that lowest control should really have been used as a calibrator instead of a control, because they felt that it was not, that it's only 12.5% of the lowest calibrator, and that it would be more appropriate to have something higher than just 12.5%. At the very bottom of the curve, where we're talking about the lowest concentrations, it may not accurately reflect the results. I don't know if that makes any sense.
So we're trying to figure out what that would mean in terms of the results of your analysis.
They were questioning whether the lowest concentrations that we're reporting, that we were quantitating, if they were really accurate based on, if that control was monitoring them appropriately. I guess they were questioning our limit of quantitation, basically. Oh, well, the impact is that we added another calibrator, as we said. There were that is a 0.05 milligram per. The impact would be that we would still be able to say for sure that the drug was present, or the substance that we're analyzing for is present, but that maybe the quantitation would not be as accurate as it should be. Sorry?
What?
It wouldn't be an impurity. You see, we have a limit of quantitation and a limit of detection. The limit of detection, we can show that drug or substance is there. But when you get to very low quantities, you cannot sometimes accurately give a number, assign a number to that. So what we do a lot of times, we will report it less than a certain, whatever our limit of quantitation is.
So you could have a blood alcohol level, or what would be an example of what you're doing?
This did not apply to the alcohols. There was no problem with the alcohols. What we were using, we are not using a linear calibration curve for this particular test, but rather a quadratic equation. So the curve, so it's not a straight line. And I guess in layman's terms, when you come to the very bottom of that curve, they felt that one lowest control was not appropriate, it was too low. So we changed it.
Okay, I think the questions are just directed. Go ahead.
I'm sorry?
What kind of substances are you testing for in this battery of tests?
Oh, this is our test where we're testing for anywhere between 200 to 250 different substances. We screen for that many, and then whatever we detect as positive, we do a quantitative test.
Question, material is below a certain threshold that it can't be called now because the bar is higher?
It would be reported as detected less than whatever the limit of quantitation is.
on saying that a certain substance is present, it will only affect the assessment of the quantity.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, do you want to go on to the next L6 criteria?
Okay, the other one is actually simpler. I think it's simpler to explain. ABFT really does not have a mandatory range for acceptance of controls, but it is generally plus minus 20% is generally considered to be acceptable. When we have in postmortem work, we very often deal with tissues rather than just blood or urine. And sometimes because of the condition of either decomposition or, well, mainly decomposition, I would say, and our controls are always in a matrix, in a matched matrix. Sometimes we couldn't really accomplish, on rare occasions I have to say, the controls to be in the plus minus 20%. So what we were accepting was for tissues, not for blood, plus minus 30%. And again, the inspectors felt that we should change that, so we did. And so now our iron ratios for controls are within plus minus 20% rather than accepting them for 30%.
Okay, and ABFT accepted these corrective actions.
Yes, they did.
And recommended full accreditation of the lab. Are there any other questions or discussions?
F and F5. What exactly is the issue there?
I'm sorry, is that in the page 20? F5. Oh, is that actually 19? Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I wanted to.
This is page 19, and this is, what's the question? Sorry, the F what?
Oh, F5. Okay, I'm sorry, Albert, what is your question on that?
The question is, what's the concern here? Because I can't understand it.
Okay, we use the immune. Quite frankly, I didn't quite understand what their concern is. We use immunoassays, as many other labs do, for screening. We do have, for a post-mortem laboratory, rather large volume. So in any method, you want to make sure that when you run a batch of samples, that if you run one that has a very high concentration, that if the next one comes up positive, that was not a carryover from the previous sample. Because all of our immunoassays are only a screen, they are confirmed by a different method. So we are not that concerned about a possible carryover, because that sample will be all the positive samples will be reanalyzed by a different method from a separate aliquot. So we feel that even if there is some carryover, that's going to be taken care of in the second step when we do the confirmation. I don't know, a lot of labs will also insert after a high sample, they will run a blank to make sure that if there is any carryover. We do control differently for our quantitative, for our second step procedures, but I don't know, they, basically, I think what the inspector is saying, that they would have done it differently. They would do it differently. So I think it was just a difference in opinion. And I don't know, I have my toxicology colleagues here, and I'm not sure what they do, but we felt that because we confirm everything, that a possible carryover is not an issue.
Adjacent patient sample. Are we talking about something that's in a bottle, or are we worried about something that's in the next bed?
We're here having a hard time hearing you, Ira. Could you put the speaker near you? Thanks.
On page 20 of adjacent patient sample. What is that?
Is that page 20 or 19?
It's in
20.
it's 20 in the recommended corrective action.
F5.
The recommended,
Yes.
okay.
The last 5.
Oh, the adjacent patient sample is the next sample. Right, we run, this is a batch, we have, let's say, 20 samples. What they're saying is, okay, that's what it is, the adjacent sample.
Okay. Any further discussion? Right, could I have a motion to approve then the correct accreditation for the Chief Medical Examiner, Department of Forensic Toxicology in New York City? I make a motion, Dr. Corrado, second to the motion. Dr. Jenny, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Is there
I'll abstain.
okay, is there any opposition? All right, then the motion is carried. Congratulations.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is the New York State Police Forensic Laboratory System. Inspector Ziofsky is here, and could you come up and join us, please? And this was an ASCLD lab surveillance inspection, so it's not the accreditation inspection, but it's a surveillance inspection, which is mid-year,
Annual.
Annual.
Every
Annual.
year.
Okay, and Kathy, do you want to talk about it, and then
Sure.
we'll turn it over to Inspector Ziofsky?
Their surveillance inspection is here under accreditation actions only because we have to vote on the change in scope. That's also included. But as to their surveillance inspection, this is their first surveillance inspection. They were accredited under the international program last year in 2008. And this year, the inspectors came back and they did an inspection of 2 laboratories, the Forensic Investigation Center and the Mid-Hudson Regional Crime Lab, as well as they looked at all quality issues out of the Forensic Investigation Center. I just received an email from ASCLD Lab yesterday noting that ASCLD Lab has voted on September 12th to reaccredit, to continue their international accreditation. Even though we're not voting on it, the ASCLD Lab International does vote every year on their surveillance. But it is here now just because we have to vote on their change in scope, and they're moving their trace subdisciplines in 2 of their laboratories at the Forensic Investigation Center in Albany and the Western Regional Crime Lab. They're moving their some trace subdisciplines under that chemical, general physical and chemical analysis category. This issue has been done before in several labs, and it will continue until they're moved under that category.
Okay, so Inspector Ziofsky, do you have anything you want to add?
No, I'll answer questions though.
Okay, so we have had this issue come up before, and we have a couple of these issues today, where ASCLD Lab really took a number of subdisciplines for trace and put them under a general category of general physical and chemical analysis, and that has motivated the labs to change their subdisciplines, which requires the commission to vote on that change. So if there's questions about that, we have Inspector Ziofsky to answer those questions. Any discussion about the FIC? Okay, then I will ask for a motion to change in scope for the FIC to reflect the general physical and chemical analysis category of testing in the trace evidence category. So if I could have a motion.
So moved.
Okay, Bill Fitzpatrick, second.
I say.
Judge McQuillan. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Is there any opposition?
Abstain.
Okay, one abstention, no opposition. So the motion to grant the change in scope of accreditation is carried, and thank you very much.
That was, you said for the FIC, you have to do a separate
FIC?
vote for the Western Regional Lab?
Okay, for the FIC?
Yeah. I
Okay,
don't know if we have to do.
well, since I didn't include it, we do the Western Regional Laboratory as well within that motion. So I'll just amend the motion to include both entities and just ask all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Okay, the motion is carried.
And just to note that they had no corrective actions on their surveillance inspection, which is a nice little accomplishment.
Thank you very much.
That's great, thank you. Okay, the next item is the Westchester County Department of Laboratories and Research Division of Forensic Science. The lab director, Bob Adamo, is here. Thank you. And this is also a change in scope for general physical and chemical analysis, the same issue that we just had with the state police labs. There is a letter granting approval from SLab Lab. And are there any questions regarding this request? Okay, could I have a motion for the change in scope? Okay, and that's Superintendent Corbett. Second, Dr. Corrado. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposition? An abstention? Any abstention? No? Okay. The motion is granted. Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is the Erie County Department of Central Police Services Forensic Laboratory. We have Dr. Simich here. This is, again, this is really a letter requesting provisional accreditation in trace evidence subdisciplines of fracture matches and polymers duct tape. And so, Kathy, do you want to say anything, or should I turn it over to Dr.
No, just that DCGS has received their criminalistics training manual, and which outlines what they handle in their training for these disciplines, as well as any certificates of training that their analysts have already done and accomplished. So we've reviewed that, and it does seem to be complete. So they're, I believe, asking for a provisional accreditation in these subdisciplines for a period of 1 year. Is that correct?
Well, we're going to request ASCLD to audit that on our next interim audit, which is coming up end of 2010, 2011, early 2011.
But we give the provisional accreditation for a period of a year, but you may not need the entire year, is what you're saying, right?
It'll be close.
It'll be
Yes.
close to do it within a year.
Can we do 18 months, or is that not doable?
I don't know.
We've never done that before, but we generally what we do is have you request an extension after the year if they don't come in before then.
Well, that will allow us to hopefully get some casework if the cases come in and be able to perform it. So then ASCLD will be able to inspect it. They do like to see casework files for each subdiscipline. So that's one of the goals of the request.
Okay, any other discussion? Yes.
Are there PTs for duct tape?
No, not that I'm aware of.
When was the last this body approved this lab for this function?
Could you repeat it? The last time we approved this lab?
This laboratory for this function. The statement is that that there was an ongoing practice at this laboratory, but for the fact that in the re-accreditation application, subdiscipline was left out, it wasn't inspected by that lab. I'm questioning when the last time was that this lab received our endorsement to do this work?
2008. This is 2008.
So you were accredited for doing this in 2008.
Well, that was our last accreditation, but prior to that, it would have been our interim in 2005.
But at that time, when you were accredited, were you doing these subdisciplines?
Yes, we were doing them, but they were just left off the application. So ASCLD
Okay.
did not formally examine those files and specifically approve those categories. Those are subdisciplines that do need to be on the license.
Okay, so you stopped doing them then during that period?
Right, correct.
At that time, was duct tape included within trace evidence?
Yes.
Any other questions, Ira?
The heart of my question is that as long as we have at least in the past approved this laboratory undertaking this work, I've got no issue with this request. We have never done that. Even if it was as long ago as 2005, it makes it a little easier.
Could you get the microphone right in front of you? Because it broke up, so we'll keep it there.
Might as well. That in 2005, the lab was reviewed. We endorsed the lab doing this work. That was the last time that was done, but at least it was specifically taken care of under that authorization. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
All right. And then you continued to work. Mistake occurred, and you weren't accredited. That's why you're asking for the provisional, right?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
And there really isn't any way to get reaccredited without doing provisional accreditation because you need the casework to be approved by SCLAD Labs.
That's
Is that
correct.
correct? So we couldn't just agree to accredit you again for a discipline you used to perform. Okay. I know in some cases laboratories have gotten test cases to work on to expedite the process. Is that something that you consider, or would that just be
We
too
haven't really
costly, or-
considered the need for that. We're just going to wait and see if any requests come in. If we do, have your approval to perform them in-house, and if they do, then we'll perform the casework and
be ready to be
if you're ready.
accredited? All right. Any further discussion? Yes, Dr. Jenny?
There's some confusion on the category. Stuff trace evidence. We just voted on 2 laboratories that removed the subdisciplines and renamed to a more general category. And now we're being asked to approve a laboratory for a subdiscipline in trace evidence.
A good question.
Well, the question really has to do with, I can explain that Erie is an ASCLAD lab legacy laboratory. The 2 laboratories you were talking to are ISO International, so they track things a little differently, and that's the difference. There is not that category in the legacy program, the general physical and chemical analysis.
All right, thank you.
Okay. So is there a motion to grant provisional accreditation to the Central Police Services Forensic Laboratory in Erie County for these 2 subdisciplines for a period of 1 year? Motion?
I'll make that.
Dr. Crotto, a second. Jim Murphy. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Any abstentions? Okay, that motion is carried. Before you leave, though, let's just see. Okay, this is just the 5th item on the agenda. It's now under new business. Is a laboratory update. Well, I guess you are off the hook because it's the Erie County Medical Examiner's Office of Forensic Toxicology Laboratory. These items are, again, the mid-cycle review so no vote is required. Kathy, do you just want to address the report?
Sure. The first one is the Erie County Medical Examiner Office of Forensic Toxicology. No new problems were really brought up in their mid-cycle review. It is noted that they are now performing the DUI, DUID, the driving under the influence of drugs testing for Erie County. This was discussed at one of our previous commission meetings, where the Erie County Central Police Services Laboratory has stopped doing the toxicology and is now, that's being transferred to the medical examiner's office. It is noted that the caseload has increased for Erie County, approximately about 30%, so they're going to have to deal with that, I assume.
By the medical examiners in the toxicology lab,
Right.
Because of the change. I know last budget cycle, when the commission was very concerned about the loss in possible Department of Health funding to the public labs, that one of the issues that we faced was a desire to see labs look at opportunities to consolidate services, avoid duplication of efforts. And I don't know if that was responsible for this or why the decision was made, but is there someone that could speak to that from Erie County?
Yes, my name is Bob Osowitz. We had gotten a request from the stop DWI person in Erie County, wondering that if we could take over the confirmational test for Erie County that was being sent to a reference laboratory. And in discussions with Dr. John Simich at the Central Police Services Laboratory, we felt it'd be best if we just assumed total control over the DUI. That would relieve them from having to hire additional personnel, and we could incorporate that work into our routine practice. What we didn't count on at the time was the amount of testimony time going to trial and the work that entailed. But so far we've been successful in terms of assuming that duties in spite of the increased workload.
I appreciate that, and we continue to appreciate any efforts underway by labs to try to consolidate or avoid duplication, and if there's ways that we can assist on the part of the commission, please let us know. Thank you. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the Monroe County Office of the Medical Examiner Forensic Toxicology Laboratory. Dr. Bino is here. This is also a mid-cycle review. Kathy, do you want to talk about the report?
Just that the laboratory continues to be in compliance with requirements in the program. No new issues except for the fact that they are also facing significant budget cuts for next year. And they may be forced to cut services if they don't receive additional funding. So I think that is of a concern. It's a concern of many of the laboratories.
Dr. Bino, do you want to address that issue?
Sure. I don't have anything really. As of the moment, we've preserved our budget for next year. I think all of the labs are facing real concerns. We heard at the NICLAC meeting yesterday about some issues in some of the counties where people are having to forego, a certain number of hours a week of pay and defer that payment till retirement. In other places, they're deferring a week or two a year pay till retirement. So there's a lot of things going on that may affect laboratories. Right now, we are maintaining our funding for next year. The Article 6 funding for us was restored, so that was the major potential source of cuts, and right now that's been preserved for our laboratory, but I think other laboratories have been negatively impacted.
Okay, thank you. The next item is the Suffolk County Office of the Chief Medical Examiner Toxicology Lab. It's a mid-cycle review as well. Kathy?
In your packets is the report of the mid-cycle review. Dr. Lair is in New York City, and at the time, we have not received a letter from ABFT yet, but I don't know if you've received it in the last few days, but in any event, there's no significant changes in their laboratory.
Okay.
I did receive an email from ABFT this morning, and it was a brief apology that the, I guess it's the committee of Graham Jones and 2 other people, he has not heard the reply from 2 other people. They expect to do so in the next 2 weeks. But he looked everything over, and he said there's really nothing significant that ABFT is going to come back with.
That's good news. Thank you very much, Dr. Lair. The next item is the New York City Police Department Police Laboratory. Dr. Pizzola is here. This was an ASCLD lab international surveillance inspection that was conducted in August. And Kathy, do you want to address the issues?
Yep. I also received an email from ASCLD Lab noting that they were voted on September 12th as well, and they're to continue their ASCLD Lab international accreditation. They had no major corrective actions. They did have a incident that it's in the comment section on page 4 that the inspectors felt should have been handled a little differently, and there was a question on how the corrective action was actually handled in the laboratory. Instead of being a level 3, they felt it should have been more of a higher level of concern since it involved evidence. But
Dr. Pizzola, I know you're here, so do you want to just come up and address the issue briefly?
Yes, this is a carryover from the previous legacy program in which we were accredited under. We had 3 levels of inconsistencies, level 3, 2, and 1 being most serious. And in the ISO program, in their program overview, they only recognize 2 levels of what they call nonconformities. So they're asking us, since it touched on the integrity of evidence, that we reconsider our position and possibly change over to only considering having 2 levels, 1 and 2. But this was, in their opinion, not written in stone. It's really a matter of how we define it in our management system. So we are currently looking at this. We haven't decided which way we're going to go with it. For example, you could have a case where you have a hypothetical case of 1,000 tablets. 1 tablet falls on the floor. You analyze the other 999 tablets. Effectively, there's no problem with the analysis. The weight is correct for those 999. But you got the 1 tablet on the floor. Does that have an impact on that case? Does that detract from the integrity of that case? So that's the question for the management system to try to define. There are going to be cases, clearly, where it's going to impact on the case. And then, so that's what ASCLD Lab is asking us to look at. And so we're trying to develop some new rules and policies on this particular topic, and that's essentially it.
Okay. Any other questions or discussions about that issue? Okay, thank you. And Deputy Commissioner Pulaski is here as well. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So that is concludes the actual laboratory reporting or accreditation issues that we have to consider today on the Commission. And we are now moving to the category of old business. The first item on the agenda is the partial match update. I'm sorry to report that we're still hard at work on the draft regulations. The effort to make one change indicated that we had other things that needed updating as far as the regulations were concerned. We hope to finish that very shortly and be able to circulate that draft. So you will have plenty of time to consider it before our next meeting, when we will ask for you to vote on a regulation. Then we have to go through the regulation process, as was discussed last time. So we're still on target. It's just taking longer than we originally planned to complete all the drafting and revisions. And of course, as we circulate that, I expect we may have feedback from members of the commission, since we were not unanimous on our vote on that issue. So it's still something that we're working on, and hope to have ready for a vote at our next meeting. The next item, these are all carryover items, was an issue that Barry asked us to put on the agenda, and we deferred it last meeting because he could not be here. And so I think we have had some discussion about the issue of sequential unmasking. I don't know, Peter, if you want to talk further about it, or what I'll do is simply remove it, and when Barry wants to put it back on the agenda, he can let us know, and we can add it to the agenda again for further discussion.
The last minute to be approved.
Right.
What happened between the last meeting and this meeting was we were going to get a written opinion from the DNA subcommittee on this issue, and also a written opinion from NICLAC. And I think you were going to take that up with both of those entities and then present their opinions for this meeting, so it would be done in conjunction with the discussion of the letter to the journal. So I guess the first question is, do you have opinions from those two entities?
Well, it's been referred to those two entities, but we have not received anything from either one of them. So I expect that we will have information before our December 11th meeting. Kathy, do you have any report from the NICLAC?
I think we discussed it at NICLAC, but also NICLAC felt that this is something that needed to be discussed by the biology DNA twig group, the technical working group, and it was referred to them, and probably at the next meeting NICLAC can speak to that. I think we want to hear first from the twig.
Pardon me, Peter?
November 13th.
Okay, and do you know what is the meeting of the DNA subcommittee?
I think it'll be
November 13th. What was the first question?
the biology.
Biotwig is end of October. Sorry, I don't have the date.
So, no. All I'm suggesting is it would be premature to have a discussion now anyway, because we don't have feedback from those two entities. So I guess we should definitely put it on the December agenda.
Okay.
And then just ensure that whatever written comments or what have you from both of those entities are in and distributed prior to the December meeting.
Okay. I think we'll be able to do that. The next item, I think, was what I was referring to. Sorry if I got confused. Was a letter from Barry regarding information sharing with the FBI and Innocence Project, which we haven't fully discussed, but have made available to the members of the commission. And I think was a way for the Innocence Commission to inform members of the defense bar about issues that come up, particularly through investigations by the IG of misconduct at the labs. So I think it was there for informational purposes as a model. Peter, I don't know if you want to add anything else on that issue.
No, I think the letter is self-explanatory. I agree with you. I just think that we should bear it in mind, if you will, as we're discussing other kinds of investigations that occur in the state. I think we're going to be discussing one such investigation later in this meeting from the Erie County, right? Are we?
We do have some discussions that will be taking place in executive session very shortly. So I think that would be, we can talk about it then. And then the other item has just been carried over, and that really is working on both the New York State Bar Association Task Force and the NAS report. I know several of us are also serving now in the Chief Judge's new task force, the Justice Task Force, which will be meeting on Friday to also look at issues regarding wrongful convictions. It will be a continuing standing task force, and I know Kathy Corrado is a member of that task force, and I also serve on it, and many members of the judiciary. So some of those recommendations in the State Bar Association Task Force will continue to be reviewed by that task force as well. So it's something that I think will be our work in the next months and years going forward, because there are so many issues of importance that were raised in both of those reports. No, go ahead.
Denise, the one thing I would add to that is that I think that the NES report really belongs in a different category than the New York State Bar Association Task Force or the Chief Judge's commission that he just established that you're participating in. In that, you know, the NES report was this 2-year blue ribbon inquiry into the status of forensic science in the country, and many of the issues that the report hit upon directly affect the work of our commission. In Texas, for instance, they decided to have a formal roundtable discussion of their Forensic Science Commission on the subject of the NES report. And I think it would be very useful if maybe we could schedule for the December meeting to have somebody who could speak to our body on the sort of the intersection of the NES report and the mission of our commission, if you will. I think that would be very important, because there are certain problems that it raises for the work of our commission that we at least should consider. Some people may want to reject them, some people may want to accept them and actually do something in response to them, but we need to have that kind of discussion presentation before we can make an intelligent decision.
Okay, any other discussion? I know the December agenda is pretty chock full because of the partial match issue and the sequential unmasking issue, which I think will probably take up most of our time. But I do think this is an important issue. I know, I don't know if Barry is there, but I know Gina and Kim Chavone from here are at the National Governors Association meeting in D.C. Dealing with forensic science issues. And I know that they are having a number of presentations, including presentations on the NAS report there. So they may be able to be helpful in identifying someone who could do what Peter is recommending, and it may be helpful to have those discussions going forward. I don't think December is probably the time to be able to do it, so we may have to do it after that. But that's something we certainly can pursue.
Agreement that we can't do it at the December meeting because of we're too full with business already, that we commit now to have that kind of formal discussion at the next meeting after December, and that I think it'd be great if we included somebody who presented at the governor's meeting, but I think it would also make sense if we could get one of the scientists who participated in the actual NAS itself, and invite one of them to attend our meeting and have that discussion. If that's acceptable.
Is there any other discussion about that from the other commissioners?
I'm just, I mean, we've discussed the NAS report. I think it was the last meeting or the meeting before. I'm not exactly clear as to what this person speaking to our group on the intersection of the NSA report and our commission means. What do we need to hear?
General discussion about that there was a study done and there was a report, but some of the specific findings and recommendations would have impact on our work. For instance, okay, right now, although our commission has the authority to set higher standards of accreditation than ASCLD Lab, we have decided going forward for some number of years that we would use ASCLD Lab as the standard, period. One of the concerns with ASCLD Lab accreditation is that it doesn't have a requirement built into it that the underlying methodology or science has been sufficiently validated scientifically. It assumes that and then goes off on certain quality control and quality assurance items. We may very well wish to pursue a more rigorous kind of scrutiny of methodologies than ASCLD Lab currently does to meet some of the criticisms of the NAS. We may not, but we have not had that discussion yet, and we certainly should, Bill. So the best way to have that discussion in a way like they're doing it in the Texas Commission, I would hate to see us sort of see Texas sort of pursue this thing more comprehensively than we do, would be to have a real comprehensive discussion of it, if not at the December meeting, then at the next meeting, where we can have different perspectives on what, if any, impact it has on the way we perform our oversight functions of forensic laboratories in New York State.
Well,
We certainly haven't had that.
Well, it may be helpful in light of your remarks to have ASCLD come back here too. It's been about 2 years, I think, since we had ASCLD presenting to us, but I don't know about the state of Texas and whether they require all of their labs to complete ASCLD accreditation or ABFT accreditation. I also do feel that we have increased standards with the international program under ASCLD Labs. So I'm always willing to learn and hear and explore, but it may be helpful to see what ASCLD Labs has done and their response to issues raised in the NAS report also. Yes, Dr. Corrado?
I would just like to say we discussed a bit the NAS report at the NICLAC meeting, and the laboratory directors, we support the majority of what's in the NAS report. We think it's a lot of things are very good ideas, and we hope that they come to fruition. We really do feel that the majority of the things that are in the reports, as the commissioner said, we are already doing. I mean, we have higher standards here in New York than in other places. We have good QA, QC. We follow SOPs. We're proficiency tested. So the most part, we feel like we are already ahead of the game in following a lot of the recommendations of the NAS. We do feel there's a couple issues in the report that are brought up that we think might, be something we need to look at. We were looking at the certification issue of certifying forensic experts, and we all feel while we in general would support that, there are some issues that need to be addressed with that, particularly if there is going to be certification applied to the forensic science in New York and the forensic scientists that testify. We feel that it should be applied to all forensic scientists that testify, both the public and private laboratories, police agencies, and defense experts. We're concerned about who would determine what certifying bodies should be used, because there are many certifying bodies out there, and depending, some people you could pay your money and be certified, and we want to make sure that it's determined up front which certifying bodies would be good. And we also have concerns with the unions and civil service, because putting something like certification in place could lead to issues that we have with personnel. And probably the most important issue we have is funding. and that would be for both certification in terms of funding the certification fees and the additional training. But I'll say for all of the issues that come up in the NAS report, as you've heard, the laboratories are faced with, as everybody is, with really severe cuts in personnel. I mean, my county alone, we've been told we have to cut personnel again, and I don't see how, if we are being asked to add all these additional things that we need to do, we certainly are going to need additional funding. We cannot have an unfunded mandate on a lot of these things. So we would support further discussion on this, but we just want to make sure that we're heard on that. And the last issue that I was asked to bring up is the NICLAC does not agree with the NAS standing on separating the laboratories from police agencies. We feel that through the accreditation process, there's enough buffer between the police agencies and the laboratories, at least here in New York State, that is not really a concern, given that we are all accredited and have to meet the accreditation guidelines. And if any lab directors would like to add anything to that, you're welcome to.
Anyone else want to speak to that? Yes, Dr. Bina?
Yeah, I think one thing that we maybe didn't discuss, but the other thing in the NAS report that certainly I as lab director don't support is the creation of a national agency to specify standards, et cetera, because again, with the diversity of practice we always look at, for example, tox lab versus crime labs, the totally different way in which they operate, the much smaller voice the toxicology laboratories tend to have in that. The likelihood is you're going to spend an awful lot of money on a central federal agency, and there's going to be certain areas that are really lost or regulations passed where they don't really appreciate the ultimate impact of that, and all that money I think can be better spent in supporting states like ours where we already have these kinds of policies in place.
Right, thank you. Before I call on Peter again, any other discussion from anyone else? Okay, Peter?
The last comments were really good, and I would encourage not only ASPAT Lab to participate in the discussion at our meeting. I guess it would be in March. I'm not sure when the next meeting would be in the cycle, but ASPAT Lab should formally participate. NICLAC should formally participate. It's really important that if this commission is going to consider some of these issues, and I think it should, that it have a full airing of all different perspectives based on experiences. But there's certainly no reason not to have that discussion because there's some really meaty issues here that that's what our commission is all about, so we can't run from it.
Any other discussion?
I would just
Yes.
like to sort of reiterate what Dr. Bino said, that toxicology does have a relatively small voice, and even Peter keeps talking about ASPAT Lab, but we would certainly like to, as toxicologists, to have ABFT represented along with ASPAT.
Okay, that's a good point, and you
Yeah.
made it before, and somehow I slipped up on it, but I got
have
it.
to keep trying.
Okay, absolutely, absolutely. Well,
Denise,
Yes.
one thing, I don't know how many people in the commission are aware of it. Barry and I were just appointed, I want to get this right, co-chairs of the Forensic Science Subcommittee of the Criminal Justice Section of the American Bar Association. Don't ask me to repeat that. And one of the things that we've been working on is a full discussion of the NAS report. And we're going to do exactly what Peter was just suggesting. And obviously I would be, loath to have to do it twice, but certainly when we do that, I think, Barry and I both being members of the commission, we could certainly report back to you folks and maybe save some time on that.
well, I know we've done seminars or whatever separate from the commission meeting and invited all the commissioners to attend and hear from, national speakers, local speakers, which makes it a little easier since our agenda is always so long for commission meetings.
Right.
So it may be that we could take advantage of that program and commissioners could make every effort to attend and,
Yeah, I don't know what it's going to be.
have a follow-up discussion.
We haven't picked a location yet, and I'm sure it's going to be videotaped, so just a thought.
Your meeting, is I'm somewhat familiar with what you intend to do through the ABA, is a meeting designed for lawyers to have this kind of discussion. What I'm talking about, I'm just somewhat surprised that there would be some resistance to this, is our commission has a responsibility to assure.
No, Peter, I'm not resisting.
Forensic science product in all the laboratories in New York State. That's our mandate, and as others have already said, it's a stronger mandate that exists probably in 48 of the other 50 states. The NAS report deals specifically with the kind of work that we do, and not to have a comprehensive discussion of our body with input from NICLAC, with input from the Toxicology Board, from Askeladd Lab, and from other scientists on this point to see if we need to in any way modify what it is we do. It's actually, we'd be remiss not to go there. And I'm just somewhat surprised that people are, Bill, I'm surprised that you're expressing some resistance to it.
Well, I don't know, Peter, that it's resistance as much as trying to see how that fits within our commission structure and the time constraints that we work under. We've had robust discussions already. We certainly maybe should break the issues down into individual issues and try to devote time at our meeting to address the issues in the context of the commission. But it sounded like you were proposing in some ways a symposium that doesn't fit that well in a commission that has 2 or 3 hours of business before it.
Yeah, Peter, don't misunderstand me. I would prefer, like we did on the partial match, we had a separate, I don't want to call it it was kind of like a seminar, and then many of us attended. I know Ann was there, I was there, I forget who else was there. I'd prefer something like that where you weren't boxed in by, well, we've got an hour and trains to catch and so forth and so on. I just don't think that this format lends itself to what Peter is looking for.
That DCGS organized that kind of sort of seminar type.
Yeah, I think that what Barry and I are going to do might serve the purpose, but you don't seem to like that idea. But
I don't think it's adequate to have you and Barry and a group of lawyers have that discussion when there are scientists, forensic scientists, and other types of groups represented in our commission. The purpose of it would be, Bill, to see whether or not the commission needs to take additional or different action.
I haven't talked to Barry. I haven't talked to Barry in the last couple of days, but I certainly intend, as co-chair, to have our discussion for the ABA.
Well, let me do this. I think the suggestion is a good one, that there are many important issues that we have to keep before the commission and discuss as they relate to the commission's work. Please feel free to suggest those issues, and so that we set aside time at commission meetings to discuss them. Maybe better to break them down individually. And if you have suggestions on speakers we should hear from, we can try to do that within limited budget, because our budget's as tight as it's ever been in terms of bringing in speakers. But I think this is not even a one meeting issue. It's going to continue to be something that we need to pay attention to and consider. And if you could keep us informed, Bill, of what the plans are for the ABA. I will talk to Gina and maybe to Barry if he is at the Governors Association to look at their program and the speakers that they've heard there. And we'll continue to entertain requests in terms of what we should include on the agenda for the commission meeting. If at the next meeting you want to make a motion and the majority of the commissioners feel that we should set aside time and try to put together this kind of robust symposium, it's certainly something that we will attempt to try to do within the budget limitations that we find ourselves. But I think we all do agree with you, Peter, that these are really important issues that we have to continue to focus on, and that's our intention to do in the months and in the year ahead. So at this point, we have really covered all of the agenda items except for executive session items. And for the executive session, we will have an item on the New York City Police Department, Police Laboratory, and we will have an item on the Erie County Department of Central Police Services. So the lab personnel associated with those labs, I would ask to remain outside of the room so that you can come in and address your particular issues. Everyone else will need to excuse before we do that and stop the webcast. However, I would ask for a motion to go into executive session. The basis for the executive session is that we are going to address ongoing personnel matters involving employees at certain forensic laboratories in the state, and so that's a basis for us to take up these matters in executive session. So could I have a motion to go into executive session? Bill, second, Dr. Sajay, and the motion. All in favor, please say aye. Any opposition? Okay, I really want to thank everyone who attended the meeting today. Our next meeting is December 11th. Okay, so we are going back on public website or public webcast to just close out our meeting. We have completed our executive session where we reviewed 2 matters with the NYC Police Department Police Laboratory and 1 matter with the Erie County Department of Central Police Services Forensic Laboratory that dealt with personnel matters and confidential matters with respect to those laboratories. That discussion is completed, and we are concluding our meeting. Our next meeting date is December 11th, 2009 in New York City. We will be webcasting from Albany as well. Could I have a motion to adjourn? Dr. Seji, a second? Superintendent Corbett, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposition? All right, we stand adjourned. Thank you very much.
Hey, make sure Newfeld's okay. He hasn't said anything in a half an hour.